come to choose. If it comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose. Keep the red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Night Live. We've got a very exciting event for you tonight. We're going to be talking about COP26. We're going to be talking about what it is and how our guests have been involved. We've got an absolutely brilliant panel. So let's just get straight into it and introduce everyone. I am going to start off I'm going to do it in order of when they came onto the call. So I'm going to go to Liam first. Hi Liam, do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm Liam. I'm an activist in the northeast of England, and I've been involved in the setting up of the Northeast COP26 coalition to organise today's demonstration in Newcastle, as well as a few other demonstrations and public meetings, things like that, around the issue of climate change and COP26. I'm also an activist with the Unite Union, and I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party.
Excellent, and people think we're a bit Labour-centric sometimes here, but we definitely aren't. We'll have people on from any political party, so it's really nice to have you on. I'll talk to you a bit about where you were today, but you were in Newcastle today, yeah, with that demonstration. Was it good?
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, we had about 500 people there. There was some bands we got involved. We did a demo a few weeks back, and there was a band playing off in the distance, sort of drowning out the speakers. But for today, we managed to rope them into the demonstration and get them to play for us. So we had sort of music in between speakers, and quite a vibrant protest. A lot of mix in the age and things like that, which is always good to see. Lots of unions, lots of climate change organisations. So yeah, a really brilliant day, I think.
Excellent. I love a good protest. I wasn't able to make one this week because Laura, some of the viewers will already know this, but Laura has COVID at the moment. So I'm not allowed to go on protests while she has COVID. It's just not fair. So next I'm coming to Aoife. Hi, Aoife.
Hi, hello. Apologies for my voice. It's a bit hoarse from all the chanting and all the shouting, but hello, I'm Aoife Mercedes. I'm in Glasgow, and we've had quite an eventful week, to say the least. A lot of action, a lot of rallies, a lot of protesting. And as for myself, I'm an activist, 17-year-old activist based in Manchester. And my focus is particularly on like deep rooted organising and kind of connecting people across race, gender, class, all these intersections of identity. And I've been involved with the COP Coalition for almost 2 years now, and we've been organising a lot of things. It's been really, really interesting, and it's finally really wonderful to like be in Glasgow and see everyone and just say hi and just be marching together. So it's been really, really wonderful to kind of come together and have that solidarity.
Absolutely brilliant, and you can tell you've really enjoyed that protest today with the way your voice is. We've all been there at protests where you come home and you can't speak very well. But thank you so much for joining us. And I think you may be our youngest ever guest. Is that right?
Maybe still a minor.
Well, it's amazing what you've done, and if I'd have done half of what you've done by your age, I'd be well impressed. But I still haven't now, so And but yeah, thanks so much, and we'll be talking about your experiences in Glasgow. Did you travel up from Manchester to Glasgow today?
That's right. No, sorry, not today. Sorry, last week. So I've been here for about a week. Got here last Saturday, and yeah, been trying to stay up to date with everything that's been happening in the booths and outside as well.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a little while as well because I want to know what organisation went into it. But I'm going to now introduce you to Carlos. Hi, Carlos. How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. Thank you. All good. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, and a little bit about yourself. Well,
Yeah, sure. Well, right now I'm doing a PhD at Durham University in the UK, but I'm originally from Mexico. I've been working with indigenous communities in Mexico around the energy transition, around extractivism, and basically energy justice and climate justice for maybe 10 years now. So quite a long time. Right now I'm focusing more on research. But I'm still affiliated with people's sort of like groups around against fracking in Mexico in the north, gas extractivism, and yeah, my research is based on that. And well, I've been to a couple of these COPs meetings, so I'm more or less familiar with the process. Yeah.
Qué
that's
bueno
really
conocer a alguien más mexicano.
Sí. Ah, ¿tú eres mexicana?
Sí. También, sí, sí.
Sorry.
Sí,
I didn't know.
es mi huipil de Oaxaca.
Sí, lo vi, pero como el nombre me desconcertó. Pero genial.
Bueno, sí, es irlandés.
Genial, genial. Sorry, we'll go back to English, but we didn't fellow Mexicans in the call, but that's it. Yeah.
that was brilliant. I loved that little bit of spontaneity there. So I'm going to come back to that later on as well about Indigenous people and how it affects people, and yeah, it's really, that's kind of a vital part of this that completely gets overlooked by mainstream media. So I really want to explore that in a bit of detail later on. But firstly, what I'm going to do is, like, you can all come in on this one. Any one of you, or, can come in and describe this. But what is COP26? So, we like to kind of explain everything we're doing here. So imagine we've got people like listening from all over the world. Some people may not have heard of this. I would imagine most people have. But, what is it?
Well, I think the official answer is that it's a yearly climate change conference where the leaders of the world meet so they can discuss how best to address the climate crisis. Although as a socialist, I would probably say that it's a farce where they sit around and pretend like they're going to come up with solutions. I mean, one of the most shocking images from COP26 this year, and also it's COP26 because it's 26 years of these conferences, and yet very little has been done. One of the most shocking images, I think, was when you saw them all docking in with their private jets, ready to lecture us about how to save the planet. I think that shows quite clearly the true nature of COP26 and what our leaders are really trying to do, which is fool us into thinking they're actually trying to solve the crisis.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I'm here because I got a pass basically, and I think that gave me like a bit of a remit to like be here and not just skive college for a bit. But ultimately, like, it is like nothing is really going. I don't at least feel that anything is going to come from that. Like, the reason I think there's a lot of like almost excitement, you could say, around the actions with people is because that's where change is happening ultimately. Like, that's what we're doing, that's what everyone else is doing, because like we've known about this for decades. We're doing our best to actually like take action because, as you were saying, like, just to echo what you're saying there, Liam, like, is very much like for PR essentially. Like, that's very much what it ends up being. And the whole like discussion in 1.5 was kind of like put and postponed, and like after that point you're like, yeah, it's almost embarrassing. You're like, what is this? It's pathetic. But what I will say is that the existence of COP, the existence of this thing actually happening, does allow for everyone to come together. I wish it wasn't in the UK, but I very much do appreciate the opportunity to like come in together with that global solidarity that we speak about and now finally are able to show.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Carlos?
Yeah, I think that's Liam. Now, if you have just said it quite clearly, it's basically the 26th time that these world leaders meet together to try to come up with an answer what to do with climate change. Just a few months ago, we had an IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, saying that we have to take urgent action. But then again, what the leaders or supposed leaders are saying is not in line with what we have to do. We know from the beginning that what needs to be done is cut fossil fuels. That's it. It's very simple. The problem is this is made complicated because we are trying to make a system work that basically doesn't work. We're trying to green capitalism, if we want to make it that way. We're trying to justify accumulation and occupation of territories and lands. We are trying to justify cheap labor, cheap nature, cheap, food, energy. This is basically a strategy with all these terms we hear in every COP. Now it's called net zero. It's the main one right now, the main discourse. But basically, these terms are what they are is just distractions and ways that the people in power try to justify that their system is working. And what this COP is different, what I would say is different from the other ones, at least from what I've seen, because I'm not there in the ground, as Aoife was. But what I've heard, at least the discourse outside the COP has changed. All of them, everybody is saying that this is false, this is ridiculous. Even Greta Thunberg, who is, I think, the main spokesperson outside the COP right now, her discourse is changing. She's saying like this is ridiculous, it's a farce, and it's associated with capitalism, with colonialism, with a history of extraction and plunder, and we have to recognize that this is what's happening. So what's new? My thing would be like, the question would be like, what's new in COP26? I think that's new, that we've known for a very long time, but at least now it's the common knowledge that this is a sham, it's a farce.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing, because that's permeating in circles that are outside of the left at the moment, because I think for a while on the left we thought about like the way capitalism is and the way it's trying to portray the fight against climate change as being something that actually capitalism can do. But I think ordinary people are starting to realise now that the things that they're saying are just complete bullshit. With there's people complaining on the right at the moment, and they're saying, well, you're flying in on a jet and then telling ordinary people that it's their fault because they eat meat and things like that, and it's really riling people up. And I think it's like an opportunity for people to change the perception around everything. But I'd just like to ask, before we go into the detail about like what it's been like outside, has anything important, is there anything that you can take that's happened inside that conference hall that you think, actually, that might make a tangible difference, this might be a good thing? Or has it been a complete and utter waste of time?
I'm going to have to go with the complete and utter waste of time, to be honest. Like, it's interesting, like, people, like, today I was speaking to some people, they're like, yeah, there's been some progression, and it's like, no, it's the same discourse, it's the same 5 points that they're making, especially with the whole net zero. We want real zero, like that kind of phrasing just allows more delay on action, because again, like corporations, businesses can keep doing what they're doing and just say that they're offsetting whatever somewhere else, and yet there are communities that have been and continue to be sacrificed at the expense of that because they're offsetting, and it's really stupid, it's really dumb. And yeah, there is no progression, there is no change, there is no real commitment to action.
Okay, cool. So like, is that the opinion of everyone as well?
So if I can just add something, I think that the problem now is that for the last 25 COPs, leaders have done the exact same thing. They come in with pledges, they come in with announcements, saying like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. This is our contribution. This is our pledge to reduce emissions by X year. Yeah. The problem now is that they've done the same thing, but now we just don't believe them. And we don't have the tools at the moment to verify that what they're saying will happen. And what they're saying is like dependent on so many things, maybe, Joe Biden will not be president in 2-3 years. What's going to happen? Can we take him to his word that what he said here is going to happen? We don't know, And then the problem is, since we don't have those tools to verify what they're saying, this is again a neat way for them to present their strategy to, clean their hands, and say like, yes, we have done something, we are doing something, wheels are in motion. The problem is that it's the same thing that has happened, and if we just depend on the evidence of those 25 COPs before, then we know that it's not going to lead anywhere. So even if they say we're going to go 30% emissions, even if we say we agree that deforestation will be cut, because the major point was that deforestation was going to be cut, they agreed that same thing. They said that in 2014. So it's the same. They have agreed this again, but they just are rebranding it as a new way of presenting the information. So I guess, my main point would be like, even if they come up with the best, promises to change, we are not going to be satisfied. And by this we, I mean collective we. We're not going to be satisfied unless we see, real change. And that is the point. If you look at the data, I'm sorry if I'm talking about it really quickly, but if you look at the data, they are spending way more in subsidizing fossil fuels globally, collectively, than what they are doing for, actually making a change, in investment in renewable energies, in solar and wind, whatever. Of course, they have to be done smart, because you don't to occupy lands, as they have done. It's not a green capitalist strategy. But if you just look at the money, then you have your answer. Even if they have the best pledges, they have the best promises. The money speaks more louder than words here, and I think that's a point to make.
Yeah, just quickly adding on to that, like they've pledged the bare minimum, and yet the bare minimum has not been met, like at all. The money that was promised to countries that actually need more support, given like the colonial history we have between the global north and the global south, like that hasn't been, like we need trillions, like people need trillions, and they promised, what was it, like 100, I want to say 100 million, something of the sort.
100 billion annually,
per year, exactly, per year. And we've not even met that over the past like decade, right? And that was meant to be very year. So like economically speaking, these supposed promises have not been met. And not only that, it's just the continual like land grabbing and the continual like eroding of communities. And that's just been continued, and definitely same rhetoric, just different phrasing.
So, and I think this also raises the question of where power really lies under capitalism, because I think that even if I truly believed, which I don't, that they were taking it seriously and were trying to come up with serious solutions to the climate crisis. Capitalism fundamentally is a system based around profit. Now, these people are all avowed capitalists. They are trying to solve the climate crisis from within capitalism. They're trying to solve it on the market. They're trying to find profitable solutions to it. Now, as long as we're prioritizing finding a profitable solution, we are still going to get the excesses of capitalism. I mean, for example, Carlos talked a bit about net zero, and one of the things with net zero is that it can create a level of sort of climate colonialism, if you will, where you have these huge corporations who are expanding out into areas of the global south and planting tons and tons of trees to trick people into thinking that they care about the environment and that they're offsetting all the fossil fuels that they're burning, which is a ridiculous idea anyway. But like the idea that these corporations have the right to go into these areas in the global south, which other people live on, take their land, usually by force, and then just plant some trees so they can pretend to be doing something. I mean, what that does is, it takes away the resources of those people in the global south. It takes away their food source, their source of income. And again, you see this continual excess of capitalism, colonialism, still within the green solution, which is why we can't let it be a market solution. It needs to be a socialist system change.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to basics a little bit here, and I'm sure everyone on here agrees that you can't solve this within capitalism, and actually it's contradictory. So what is it about capitalism? What is it like about perpetual growth that means that it is not sustainable? And sorry, I've sort of kind of answered the question, but you'll put it more eloquently than me, I'm sure.
I mean, it's quite simple, really. It's the whole idea is very much like continual growth, continual making a profit at the expense of communities, people themselves, resources, and it's the fact that all of this is accumulated within this top 1%. It's the fact that all these resources go to people who, like, essentially, using socialist terms, language, whatever, go to the people who own the means of production, go to these billionaires that are only billionaires out of exploitation. Like, I think that's something that people have to understand. To be a millionaire, to be a billionaire, you actually have to be like a massive exploiter of people, of labor. And as for how it's unsustainable to maintain that exploitation of people, like modern day slavery to a certain extent, depending where you are. And it's unsustainable to continually extract things from Earth's resources, etc. And yeah, the system in itself is almost reached its peak. Like, this is why we're at a moment where everyone's so angry and frustrated and want to see even more change, even more radical action, you could say, because it has reached this peak, which is so ridiculous that shit needs to change. We need to change. People, not just like us as people, but the whole system needs to change. And we have also got to consider the fact that this is a system that was born during the time of colonialism, right? Like, essentially, when we think about the Atlantic slave trade, like that is very much something that parallels what we know as capitalism today, right? That was the exploitation of labor, in the sense of no one getting paid and people getting treated horribly, and just complete violence and brutality to an extent that is so horrific that I couldn't even describe. And that has simply just morphed into this capital system that we know now today, where people are getting paid less than the bare minimum, and people are still getting away with it. And again, like, it's such a corrupt system. It's such a corrupt system. And so not only is the exploitation of resources unsustainable, like the way that people are being treated is completely unsustainable. And it can't last. It won't last. Like, we're not accepting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, because capitalism is a system based around profit, it's very short-sighted. Because, I mean, a great example of this is the pandemic. I mean, look at how the ruling class have addressed the pandemic. I mean, they haven't. They tried to sort of do something about it, but then they kept on reopening, going back into lockdown, reopening again. And the answer was this. So they always kept screaming about the economy. And it's like, you know, they are very, very, very short-sighted. They want as much profit as possible, and they want it now. You know, I look back at, you know, the start of capitalism, and you know, you see things like tram lines being ripped up, and you know, trolley buses being got rid of, and these were all very sustainable transport solutions, and they were got rid of purely because the capitalists wanted to make more money out of oil, because there was a switch over from the coal to oil, largely in transport. They wanted to keep pumping more oil, making more money out of it. And, you know, this has had a detrimental effect on the environment, and they destroyed the entire infrastructure of sustainable, climate-friendly transport to do this. You know, this is how they started, and it's how they're going to keep going. It's why we can't trust them to solve the crisis.
If I could just add maybe just a little point there, because I think Aoife and Liam just explained it quite well. What I would just add is that we need to remember that the economy is linear by extraction, right? So it's not circular. That means that we have a metabolic relations with materials and energy, and we need to continuously include more material and more energy to maintain the ways of living of the Western world, basically. So that means that since we cannot make it circular, we need more frontiers of extraction. We need more commodities, more materials, more energy that we need to extract from somewhere to sustain the economy. And if we suppose that the economy is growing, as you know, the Sustainable Development Goals keep saying that we need to grow 3% a year by 2030, if we read the Paris Agreement, even is based on that idea that we should sustain perpetual growth. This means that the economy would be 11 times the size of it that it is today by the end of the century, with more energy, basically on the idea that everybody needs to consume more energy, when in reality, energy is distributed highly unequally in the world as it is now, right? So you have more than a billion people that don't have access to energy, well, electricity, let's say, with 1%, 10% of the population consuming more than 80%. So it's insane, the amount of inequality that's not associated only to wealth or to emissions, but also to energy consumption. So the point being is, how do we, if we want to change the system, we cannot do it from within it. We have to question it from the outside, as you said from the beginning, Paul. This is not a question of how capitalism can green itself. It can't, because it can't decouple emissions or material footprints to the actual growth of the economy. So the question would be like, the answer would be, we need to stop economic growth. Economic growth is not the answer. And as my colleagues just said right now, it's a matter of, it's accumulated by the wealthiest. We have proven, and ecological economics have proven one and time again that economic growth does not solve poverty. It creates inequality. So we need to question it from the beginning.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Absolutely great comments coming in as well from our other panelists. We always consider the people at home to be another panelist on here. So really nice to see Leanne, Carl, Ruth, Julie mentioning NDCs do not include military emissions, which is scandalous. And I didn't actually know that, so thanks for that information there. That's a nationally determined contribution, so they don't include military emissions. Did we know that? Did you know that on the panel?
Yeah, sadly, yes, we know, and the military-industrial complex is not included even it's not discussed in terms of climate change when it is one of the biggest emitters globally. That's a very, very huge point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, Boris Johnson's been the president of this COP26. How embarrassing has he been? Like, what, has this been an international embarrassment for the UK to have him do what he's done, say what he's done, say what he said, and then behave in the way he's done?
I think what I find quite amusing actually is that so like Nicola Sturgeon, for example, right? I still does less than the bare minimum, but because like that bar is so low already, and Boris Johnson is like deep underground, she all of a sudden seems so much better, like ridiculously better, and she's not even doing what we want her to be doing, which is, I think, speaks a lot in itself. I remember there was an event organized where she actually participated with some indigenous peoples from Latin America. She took off her shoes, all of that, participated, at the very least participated. And where was Boris Johnson? Do you know what I mean? Like, what has he actually been doing? Like, he was in Marbella like a few weeks ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's doing his own thing. He doesn't care. He never has. And it's the fact that like people call him Boris, right? As though he's our mate. Like, no, that guy doesn't even know how much bread costs. Like, it's genuinely so ridiculous.
Did you see that he said something about, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, words are meaningless. You have to be judged on your actions. And then he took a plane down rather than take a train and things. And then he fell asleep as well during the conference because allegedly he was out drinking the night before. And, he just seems to have taken it so unseriously, like he does everything else. But like, do we know like what do people in the rest of the world think of this? Is he a national embarrassment?
Well, at least from my side of the world, I think it's seen as same ridiculous as maybe other leaders like Donald Trump or people like this who are used to calling their starting the intervention, talking about James Bond and stuff like this, which is really ridiculous. I mean, but I guess, the point is not only him, but other world leaders, even don't have this comedic interpretation, Australia arguing they're not leaving coal in the ground, Mexico, our country, the president is obsessed. He's building a new refinery to process 360,000 barrels of oil each day. And this refinery would last for 30, 50 years. And this is not an isolated case. This is the same happening in most other countries that have high impacts of climate change and are not necessarily talking about jobs, welfare, health, etc. They're just talking about economic growth, development, and the same story that we've been trying to contest here. So I think that sense of ridiculousness, of stupidity, I think is associated not only to Boris Johnson, but basically to all the majority of the world leaders out there. No?
Yeah, never mind like Bolsonaro. Like, Like we even have a chant for that. Faro Bolsonaro. It's yeah, like again, like it kind of the COP, it kind of just embodies all of this, right? You've got a room full of leaders who are just so pathetic, as people and as like leaders. If anything, I think I usually just refer to them as power holders because essentially that's what they do. They hold power. I think power is meant to be something that's fluid. Power is meant to, we all have power one way or another, except when we live in this kind of very hierarchical system, right, which is integral to how capitalism works, right? You have power holders, people who hold this immense amount of control and power over others' lives, which is it's actually quite ridiculous when I think about it. It's really ridiculous to think that there are people who could change people's lives for for better or for worse, right? They have the power to do that, and it's very much about kind of breaking that down, dismantling that, and finally being able to realize the fluidity of what we can truly do.
Liam, I'm going to direct this one at you. So a lot of the people who were invited as guests were billionaires. Now we've kind of highlighted billionaires as being a problem, and the fact, maybe not the billionaires themselves, but the fact that our system creates billionaires is one of the major problems that's contributing towards climate change. So how inappropriate was it to get these guys to come along and say, hey, or is this like something that maybe people can get behind, the idea that, well, tell the billionaires and encourage them and make them the heroes of the situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's incredibly inappropriate. I mean, I saw a comment from Julie in the chat where she said that, I mean, in addition to inviting the billionaires, Johnson actually took a private jet to go and dine with a climate change denier. So, you know, this is the kind of mentality we're dealing with around COP. It's very hypocritical, but I think that, you know, again, it is just a way for the billionaires to pretend like they're doing something. You know, they are, and, you know, billionaires are really big on these individual solutions to climate change. That, I mean, Bill Gates is always going on about the veganism and things like that. I'm sure people will have seen Elon Musk recently in the news talking about how he's going to someone from the UN said that 2% of his wealth could end world hunger, and he responded by saying, well, firstly, prove it and I'll do it, which is another lie, but secondly, he said, I'm going to save this money and use it to take all of humanity to Mars. I mean, absolutely bizarre and, you know, very self-congratulatory things which these billionaires come up with. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I think that, you know, as long as the billionaires are central to the conversation, we're never going to get anywhere. You know, this is about class struggle. It's about they will intentionally try and mislead us, so we think they're doing something. It's never going to work as long as they're in the conversation. It needs to be worker-led entirely.
I think you've struck a chord there in the chat as well. Billionaires zooming into outer space from Jane there, and I think when Jeffrey Bezos is involved, having just recently went to space in a penis, you know, just honestly, like it's beyond parody, really, isn't it? The world at the moment, but yeah.
Sorry, no, I wouldn't say it's grotesque. It's not even wrong. It's really grotesque, like what they're doing and how they are using this to shape the discourse. Because at the end, they are seen, you know, presented as saviors, like, oh yeah, they're going to invent the new climate solution to sequester CO2, put it underground, you know, spray aerosol particles to plug the sun. So these are not science fiction solutions. These are things that they are really discussing. They are investing millions and millions of money, of pounds, of dollars into these narratives without, you know, taking into account that the plunder that they have created to amass that wealth is basically what has led us to climate change, you know, to biodiversity loss, to, you know, genocide, terricide. This stuff happened because of the amalgamation of wealth by these people. So we have to not see them as saviors. We know that no technology will solve climate change. As Liam just said, I think they nailed the needle on the head there, because they're saying, like, this is class struggle, and this is how we should frame it. It has to do with the amalgamation, the amassing of wealth by these people. They are, coincidentally, as Oxfam has said, you know, time and time again, they are, you know, the highest contributors to of emissions, right? And they are also the ones who shift the discourse away from where the emissions come from. So they make CO2 the enemy without, you know, without making us think what put CO2 in the atmosphere in the first place. So I think that is what needs to be in the discussion here. And of course, it cannot be done with them. They have to be seen as a problem here.
I think I just want to pick up on something that you said, Paul, a little while ago, which was, and I just want to disagree with you a little bit there, because you said it's more about the system and not the billionaires themselves. And it's like, as much as I do agree with that statement, I actually do very much have a problem with these single individuals, because they are a huge problem as individuals. Like, that's how much power they hold, that they as individuals are are really integral to maintaining the system, as it were. So I think I just want to rephrase that as it, and yeah, they're very much part of the problem and will never be the solution. Like, we know the solution. That's the thing. Like, we know how to almost fix it, as it were, right? We know how to go beyond this and not, I think that's the thing, right? A lot of the rhetoric that you hear from these supposed leaders is very much on maintaining what we have. Like, I don't want to maintain the world that we have. I hate this. I hate the system that we live in. Obviously, I don't want to maintain that. Because it's the same system that's obviously perpetuating racism. It's the same system that feeds off homophobia, transphobia, ableism. It capitalism profits of all our oppressions, and it's actually horrific. It is genuinely horrific, and so when we actually think about the solutions to the climate crisis, when we think about how we can move past this, is about rethinking a whole new world. It's about kind of rethinking how we coexist, right? I very much what I got from when I was speaking with not just my Latin American comrades, but with my indigenous Latin American comrades, what you get there is very much this connection with Mother Earth, right? Con la madre tierra is how they say it, right? They very much have that connection. And when you're in these spaces, when you're invited, which is an honor, when you're invited to these spaces, you finally feel that reconnection, right? You feel that energy. And I think that's really important, because I think something that I very much feel within this capitalist world is this disconnect, right? And as much as I'm not a religious person, I very much value the spiritual, because I think it's very true. And I think we can interpret that however we want, right? This metaphysical sense, I think is important, because at least to me, that brings about unity. And I see that within these, with my comrades, I see that very much. It's this essence, as it were, and it doesn't have to be religious by any stretch of the imagination, unless so organized religion. It's very much just something about refinding, and reconnecting.
That is absolutely brilliant, and thanks for keeping me right. By the way, I'm a big well, I don't hate any individual people, but I hate billionaires as a group of people. So yeah, I want to go more down that line, actually. So we've done what the problems were, what it was set up to do, and what it did. But what I'm more interested in now is what you did, so what people did in their communities, in their areas, and how things have, how ordinary people, how the billions rather than the billionaires are going to deal with this. So what have there been the positives to come out of that side of it, out of the protest side of it? Liam, you were in Newcastle today. Was there anything that really stood out to you today that was something you could see a change, or any positives there?
I wouldn't say there was anything different to any other climate change demo I've been on, but I would say that other than, in general, I do think that there's less of an emphasis on more liberal, individualized solutions to climate change, and there's many more people who are now understanding that it's the system that is the problem. It's a lot easier. I remember a few years back, everyone you would speak to on a climate change demonstration would have quite bizarre opinions, which are usually all over the place, drawn from different areas about how you were going to solve the crisis. But now it's a lot more concentrated. It's a lot more clear, and it's definitely anti-capitalist. I would say that's probably the biggest difference I've seen over the past few years.
Yeah, definitely. We now have a beautiful chant, anti-capitalista, which I think is brilliant. And I think that, yeah, I definitely feel that. I think that, especially having worked with the COP coalition who organised a lot of the actions that happened today, and the hubs themselves organised these actions. We've got to take that into account. It wasn't the central body. It was just, it's this dispersal of power. It's a dispersal of action and solidarity. And yeah, absolutely. I think the rhetoric, at least amongst the people, has changed. It's not about being vegan. It's not about these individual solutions. It's about a wider want for systemic change. And there are a whole lot more people wanting that, which I think is brilliant. It definitely shows how what we've been doing for like the past few years has definitely helped push forward what we actually need to be focusing on, right? Because yeah, like our individual emissions mean nothing and are nothing in comparison with what fossil fuels and what these billionaires and what all of these corporations emit by just doing what they do, and that has everything to do with their exploitation of planet and people.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit also from like what I've seen in local communities in Mexico and a lot of people organizing on the ground. I think that what they also have become aware is that we can't rely on the state to do the changes that need to be done. So it's not even just capitalism and how it's exploiting, but also the state itself. So the war against the state is also something, or the state making war against people is something that's also happening. So I think what a lot of communities have started to do is to start to think locally how they can depend less on the state, how they can do the things by themselves to reach autonomy and produce their own well-being, define their own well-being beyond that idea of development, of economic growth, of more stuff, of what we've been told time and time again of how we should live, right? So I think there's a lot of inspiration there. Zapatistas are also in the UK now. Well, I think they left now, the UK, but they are also in Europe at the moment, and they come with a message of how to learn to listen to the other. And I think that's very interesting, and that's something we should pay attention to as well. How we can learn, not copy them or not copy the same strategies, because every place of the world is different, every context is different. But how we can learn to become autonomous, to learn to think in this way, I think is something that has changed, and that we are also adopting here when we see that these COPs, these meetings are fraud. No? We've been trying to think, how can we move away from the capital, from the state, and become, our own self of saviors, lift ourselves from this problem.
I absolutely hear that. Like, I absolutely hear that. Like, that's why I do what I do in terms of working with communities. That's why I do what I do, because it's about empowerment, and it's very much about taking back that autonomy that you have, right? And not giving that to a state who is not just like persecuting people, but like systematically persecuting people in a way, right? It's why we have these ecocides constantly, right? People from our own communities being murdered by the state, and it's horrific. It is actually horrific, because like that one person isn't just a statistic, it's a family member, it's a friend, it's someone from a community. Like, everyone feels that loss, and I know that loss, and it hurts so much. It really does. It actually really does. And it affects you. Like, I think it's one of those things that takes time to get over. And I don't think I ever will be over. It's not about that. But that's why we say their names. That's why we remember them. That's why we're doing what we do. Because, I don't think people realize how painful it is to have to live within those contexts where it is so common. It's so common to lose family, not just in terms of like ecocide, but just generally state persecution on any platform they have in terms of activism. And yeah, it really hurts. And it's one of those things that I'm slowly trying to speak about, but not necessarily get too emotional about, because it is a really personal thing. And like, I think people really have to realize that when we talk about this, it's about people. It's actually about lives on the daily, being lost on the daily. And yeah, sorry.
Don't you apologize? You've been mint.
But yeah,
yeah. I just want to echo a few of those things, actually, because I think it's really important what you're saying, and we really are seeing, people act like we don't already see the effects of climate change. We do. It's in the global south, right? There are more refugees from climate crisis than there are from any other issue. I believe the number is 197 million people That might be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I believe it's 197 million people who are climate refugees. Now that is way more than any other, like from war, from famine, from authoritarian governments, things like that. It's way more. But also, I want to share a shocking statistic I learned the other day, is that in 2020, 227 climate activists were killed while defending the earth. Now, this is on average about 4 a week. 4 climate activists a week get killed for trying to save the earth. That is a shocking number of people. And I think, more needs to be said about this. I'd only just found out about it, and I've been involved in the movement for quite a while. It's shocking, really, that more people aren't aware that this number of people are being killed just while they're protesting against it. It's quite troubling.
Yeah, I think Aoife just puts a face to how that feels and what that happens. So it's not just an abstraction, it's not just an statistics. As I was saying, we are ruled by abstractions constantly. We are reducing everything into numbers and statistics and processes, whatever, time schedules. So the thing is, like, we need to see the blunders of extraction that are associated with, for example, the new commodity frontiers of the energy transition, right? Just look at where all the lithium that will power the EV cars, the electric vehicles in the United States, in Norway, in the north of Europe, where is that lithium coming from? Where will the copper come from? Where will the cobalt, all this nickel, all these rare earth minerals, they will come mostly from the global south. And they basically will redefine politics and create these new sacrifice zones globally, where people, nature, everything will be sacrificed. And of course, it's not just lives and like, of course, those are very grave and terrible, but it's also like people's work will be degraded, extracted, reduced, discounted, whatever you want to call it. And also the non-human world will also pay the cost of that. So it's biodiversity, it's ecosystems, etc. So I think we need to link these two discussions together. As Liam was saying just now, we need to put them together. We can just separate one from the other. Even these solutions that we are rightly called false solutions to climate change, they will not solve the problem. They will create a new, green colonialism, new climate colonialism. So I think somebody mentioned that at the beginning as well. And that's something that we should also talk about. If this is a problem with decarbonization, how that decarbonization will happen is also something that we should discuss. Because if we just leave it to the market, if we just leave it to capital, then we know how it looks. It looks the same as fossil capital, but green. So I always send some chat. I always end up saying, like, well, we might have a greener world, but it will be a very unequal one.
A lot of love for you in the chat there, Aoife, as well. So yeah, everyone's got your back. Solidarity to you. With regards to Indigenous people, so this is something I'm not hugely aware of, but I do know that the Indigenous people have been living in a much more sustainable way for a long time and probably should be listened to, and the cruelty of them having to suffer the consequences of everybody else's actions. Am I right in thinking that that's a large part of the argument here?
I can go in, and of course, if somebody wants to chime in, please go ahead. Yes, this is also true because a lot of places where hot spots for biodiversity, where minerals sit, where all the places where you go to extract are also indigenous lands. So they have been at the forefront of extractivism for quite a long time. So it's normal for them to say, like, well, when we talk about the end of the world, when we talk about the apocalyptic scenarios of climate change, they sometimes argue, like, well, what world is coming to an end? Because several worlds have already ended in that context. And I think that's also something that we should associate with the climate change. Climate chaos that we have now is a symptom of that history of destruction, of pollution, of degradation, etc. So yes, I think they are at the forefront. They are also the ones that will suffer some of the worst consequences of the global heating. But they are also since they have been living with these problems for quite a long time, they have another way of relating to nature, another way of relating to each other, a new ontological, let's say, a way of understanding reality that shows that they can survive with less, better, distribute it better, So it's this idea that we should not think about efficiency, but think about sufficiency, right? Think about the frugal abundance of stuff, of our love, our friendship, of how we communicate, what really matters. Because in the language of development, in the language of the Paris Agreement, in the language of all these neoliberal treaties, what matters is the market, what matters is money, what matters is technology. And here we have another way of understanding reality, that where, let's say the human is put at the center with the earth. So I think that is something that we can learn from them. And I think there's also a point here to be made. We shouldn't romanticize them, say like, oh, they know better all the time. No, we should learn from them. We should learn to listen to them. And this is something that has been, it's been complicated, because a lot of people just say like, well, we have to become indigenous. Not necessarily, but we can learn from them quite a lot. And I think that's something that development completely demolishes. Development is a monologue. It doesn't allow anybody else to speak, to show how they live, how they, relate to each other. I think that's something that we could do here.
Yeah, definitely. Having been in Glasgow for a while, so we've got Minga and Deacon now. We're incredible, doing a lot of work. And they have these, they had their like placards, and one of them was like, I believe it said something along the lines of colonialism is the issue, is the problem, Indigenous people are the solution. And it's because they have the solutions. I think I very much echo that. And I think there's something to be recognized, having had quite a long conversation with a dear friend of mine. They were talking about how a lot of Western concepts have unfortunately kind of invaded these spaces, right? Like they often are patriarchal, unfortunately. Like a lot of the systems introduced by colonialism do exist within like these Indigenous communities, which is why it's really important to not just have them at the forefront, but especially have Indigenous women at the forefront and Two-Spirit people at the forefront. I think there's also the want to recognize how like some, like obviously many practices still continue, we still practice them, but equally a lot have been robbed from people, and equally there's this pervasion of like systems, again, patriarchal systems, all of it coming in together into these same communities. And so it's not necessarily about copying the system, it's about learning, it's about relating it to our communities, right? Because each community is going to be incredibly different, right? Like the Zapatistas, as you were saying before, Carlos, they do what they do because that was the context in which that revolution was born, right? But the UK is going to be quite a bit different, I would say, quite different. I think culturally very different, but not just that, in the way people think as well, I think is going to be relative to their lives. And I think that's really important. It's not about this other power coming in and kind of imposing an ideology as such. And that's why I don't necessarily ascribe myself or encourage someone to ascribe themselves to like a really specified ideology. I think it's more important to like understand that what we do is very much like rooted in anti-capitalism and very much, well, in the broader sense, socialism. And not only that, but it's rooted in doing things that are beneficial for those communities. It's beneficial for those communities, giving power to these communities, empowering these communities, and actually realizing the autonomy we have. And I'm very anti-state, I'm very anti-capitalist, very anti-state, because again, it only serves this capitalist system that we live in.
I think we've seen that as well with the way the state reacts to certain emergencies. So the emergencies for the banks, they reacted and to protect that wealth, and they used the state's power and the state's power to create money in order to save that. And yet we're not seeing that same sort of investment to pay for people, to actually become more sustainable and to support other nations and stuff. There was a question earlier on, was there any commitment at COP26 to support developing nations with some more money? Was there anything there?
No, the pledge that still stands was made on the Paris Agreement, and it was agreed that that developed countries, or so-called, well, I would say overdeveloped countries, will send $100 billion each year to developing countries each year. But the problem is, you look at the numbers again. If you look at the numbers, it's ridiculous. What the amount of money that they are sending, they haven't reached the pledge. That they don't even send 100 billion. They send way less, and most of what they send are loans. That means that they create debt. So they indebt countries in the south, which are already, suffering the consequences of global heating. We know this is a statistic that everybody repeats constantly. The poor will be the sacrificial lambs here. They will be the ones who pay the cost of global heating before developed countries. So what's happening here is that they're becoming indebted. They can't change anything. They can't adapt, and they then have to pay, the IMF or the World Bank or whatever USAID or these development agencies that are lending them the money. So this is again a ridiculous issue. Again, it's the same thing with technology, right? You send the technology to the south, but you have copyright to the technology. You charge a lot of money for the technology. So there's agency and power associated with technology. So it's not just a matter of distributing solar panels for everybody and that's it. No, there's power relations to be questioned here. That's something that we also need to take into account. It's money, pouring money into this problem will not solve it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about the power structures. I saw Julie put in the chat. Can the panelists talk about the possibility of ecocide being made an international crime? Now, I don't know much about the possibility of that happening. But what I do know is that in places like America, for example, you've got people like George Bush who are still walking around, who killed 1 million people in Iraq, and he's a war criminal. He's committed an international crime, and has anything been done to him? No. And this is true all across the world. You see these war criminals, these people who commit crimes against humanity, and does anything ever happen to them? Well, not unless it's advantageous to the dominant ruling class, usually America. If it's dominant if it's important to the American state, like the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, or other trials that they've managed to get in The Hague or over the years. It's only ever if it's worthwhile for them, not for us. So I think while I would welcome ecocide being made an international crime, I don't think it would fundamentally change anything, because then it does again raise the discussion about where does power really lie, and it's us who will push that change, not international organizations who try and uphold a standard which all too often can't truly be upheld.
Yeah, no, definitely like that, and like globalization, especially and when we see how that comes in, it's. I think I usually use the term internationalism if I'm talking about global solidarity and us being able to interconnect with one another. But globalization in itself, right, it's really neoliberal, fully a system that serves the powers within the powers, as it were, right? It is very much based on this hierarchy. We're at the bottom, right? These states hold a lot of power, but who within them hold the most? And as we know historically, that's always going to be these imperial powers, these neoliberal powers. And if we look a bit into the past, a few decades back, right, the people who have actually, as you were saying, Liam, where these trials have actually taken place, where people have actually been persecuted for the crimes they've committed against humanity, is almost entirely from sub-Saharan Africa, right? And that speaks a lot to how international power works. And I'm just echoing the same thing. As much as I would welcome it, I know it's not going to make that much of a difference in terms of the people who are actually perpetrating these crimes and have been and continue to do so.
Yeah, I guess I would just add a little bit there, because I think you both speak quite clearly what the problem is there. So of course, welcoming ecocide, terricide as an international crime, that would be great. But I think we shouldn't rely on it as a solution. I think what a lot of communities, movements are doing on the ground is that they are using, when they can, they use legal action to stop certain projects from going on. For example, pipelines, huge wind farms, or wind factories. I don't like wind farms. I think they should be called wind factories because they produce something. So again, wind factories, solar factories, when they are occupying land, indigenous land, what they do is that they put an injunction, they stop the development of the projects. So these are tactics that they have at their disposal to stop the advancement of those projects that dispose them of the territory of their ways of living. So I think those are some strategies that they can rely on, but then again, they're not necessarily a solution. They have to come down again to this discussion of how we define development, who is at the center of development, right? So I think, again, those issues at the global level with, typifying these war crimes, etc., might be a tool, but it's not necessarily a solution.
You've moved perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next, actually, which is what are the solutions? So what do we actually need to do? if you were sitting around and you were the people inside that COP26 and you were making those decisions, what sort of things would you have wanted to have committed to in order to, change the situation around to actually make a meaningful difference and make us more sustainable and reverse the damage that's been done? Who wants to go? Aoife, do you want to go?
Yeah, of course. I think it's curious you say that because often I think a lot of the messages I've been hearing is that the best thing a lot of people can do is just leave, if that makes sense. As in, like, leave countries alone, leave communities alone, because they know how to handle themselves. Because of course we do. Like, of course we know how to live our lives and what's best for us. Like, when again, looking historically, we're gonna go back to the 1930s. Spain in the 1930s, right? You had the anarchists, right? You had a whole lot of political things going on, but what you had were people actually, the bus drivers. I'm going to use the bus drivers for this example, right? Because what they did was, like, all of it was a whole mess, but they, like, as the bus drivers who knew what they were doing, just took it into their own hands, right? They made their timetables. They were able to, like, successfully kind of manage that, and that's just one example within, like, a whole like huge example, right, from 1930s, right? And that's the reality, is that, like, the workers, the people, like, we know how to work, we know what to do. And I think a huge part of it is just, like, dismantling that power and just being like, let people live in peace. Like, let them just live their lives, right? Let them develop their communities and actually find that balance, because there really is, like, the way in which we actually form these huge, like, countries, nations, and create these really strict borders. One is ridiculous because, like actually, like, if you had a map, right? Like, it's actually weird. It's so weird that you just can't walk across a border, right? Like, it's the idea that, like, a whole territory is, like, supposedly protected. It's not protected, it's owned, right? It's owned by like a minority of people, as it were. Like, if I think about especially in the UK, people don't really care about their communities. Like, they're quite nationalistic simply because they have an idea of community within the nation and less so within the actual people themselves. But going back to my main point, it's really that the best way you can actually work together is with fewer people, right? The best way you can, like, create actual, like, deep rooted organizing is with just a few hundred people at most, right? So if we start, like, forming our communities and finding our people, and obviously, like, just dismantling these borders and being able to travel and, like, communicate and just create our little hubs and communities of people which are welcoming, like, that form of, like, internationalism, you could say, is a lot more sustainable. And it's a lot, I think, just mentally, it makes a whole lot more sense than, like, this, like, accumulation of power and just, like, this minority of people. And so I don't think, like, first of all, I don't think, like, the power to change our future should be in the hands of a few people. I think it's very much about stepping back and letting people exist, because we can exist and we have been existing. And, like, I think a huge part of it is the fact that even being happy for some reason now feels like a rebellion. Like, not doing work, like laborious work that you don't want to be doing, is a rebellion. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, all this capitalist world wants to do is force you into making profit for, like, this minority, right? It forces you into a life of misery, right? Like, almost everyone I know who has a job complains about it constantly because they don't want to do it, especially people like my age who just have to, make a living, get a bit of money, like, to get themselves through university, right? Like, they hate these jobs, right? And it's a world that forces them. So I think the choice to kind of, like, try and exist outside of it is very much a privilege. But two, I think just, like, finding a moment and being like, you know what? No, I'm just gonna live my life, just even for, like, an hour. I'm just gonna be happy and just do what I want for a day. I'm gonna be happy and do what I want. Like, that has now become a rebellion, which is kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, I like that because they're little things. They're little things we can do to just be happy, because, like, ultimately this world doesn't want us to be happy. Like, it's not made for that. It's made for money.
Yeah, and I mean, what you say reminds me of, especially about nationalism. It reminds me of the Marx quote where he talks about the Irish and English workers and how the ruling class pit the Irish and English workers against each other, making the English workers a tool of the ruling class. And I think that's exactly how nationalism always works. Countries are pitted against each other so that the workers in any individual country identify themselves with their own ruling class instead of with other workers. As Marx also said, the workers have no nation, and that's what we need to be focusing on. The workers do have no nation, and actually when we unite on that class basis across borders, that's when we have true power. And what we really need is we need a revolution. We need a revolution which will overthrow the capitalist system, which will smash the state machinery which is being used to destroy our planet. I mean, fossil fuels, for example, are built into the capitalist system to the core. People often talk about things like agriculture, for example, and food, and the politics of food. But one of the reasons agriculture is so damaging is its reliance on fossil fuels. Wherever you look, it always comes back to fossil fuels and the reliance of the capitalist system on it. So what we really need to do, and because of how much their profits rely on it, we cannot trust them to make changes in the here and now. They will not make changes until they have worked out a way to make it profitable for them, which they can't do, because the situation is much more urgent than that. What we need is the state machinery to be smashed to pieces by the organized working class in a revolution, which can then be replaced by some new state machinery, which is run by the workers, which I think is an important point, because we can't just jump straight to glorious socialist society or a communist society, which I'm sure we would all like to. We do have to go through a certain level of workers running and controlling the states and enacting change on that basis. The workers must become the ruling class and suppress the old ruling class so that we can truly push through that change.
As much as I understand that sentiment, I think a reason I distance myself from that kind of rhetoric is mostly because of how it's very much dominated by like a white working class. I think we've got to understand like these ideas are very much European. And I don't think that's why when I talk about communities, I talk about what's fit for those communities. Our communities aren't European. Our communities they function around a lot of bases, right? A lot of intersecting identities. I think it's a lot more complex. And as much as I understand your sentiment, Liam, I don't fully agree with it, but I very much get this. I definitely agree in terms of like the empowerment of workers, right? Being able to like own our own means of production, as it were, own our work, own our labor, right? As so long as money exists, right, get paid for our labor. Like I very much work on that basis, right? When I get paid, it's because it's out of respect, right? It's not because I've been interviewed for whatever. The thing is, it's because people are paying me out of respect. And I think that's what we're going to understand is that when people work, well, while we work in this capitalist system, we work within our communities and we find money where we can, and we pay our people out of respect because we have to, essentially, right? When we're relying on money, when we're relying on the system. Yeah, I think that's very much where I come from. And I think it's interesting as well. Like we are living in a revolution. I think arguably, like that's been going on for ages. I think there's never going to be this one like switch all of a sudden. I think it's a very complicated thing, and I think it's a very interesting thing to try and actually think it through and develop and determine exactly what it is, because people have been revolting for ages, right? Like people continue to like that's why we have this Zapatistas with their autonomy and their own way of living already, and it's why we have to find that within our own communities and grab that autonomy and grab that independence from the state and grab those tools that we can use to live our lives and just be happy. I think, and like I don't know, like I think it to me at times I think it can be somewhat incremental, right? Because I think first and foremost we've got to find the connections between people, right? We've actually got to grow a basis for who we're actually working with. Like I want to know who's standing beside me as I'm marching through the streets, right? I want to know them, and I don't want to just know their name. I want to know them as people, right? We've got to reconnect, not just with our earth, but with our people.
Yeah, I think what you said is really important, and because it is true that often these solutions can be very Eurocentric. And actually, when I talk about revolution, first of all, I want to offer a bit of solidarity to a revolution which is currently under attack, the Sudanese revolution. I want to offer a huge amount of solidarity to all the Sudanese revolutionaries who are fighting against the military who are trying to take over. And actually, some of the greatest examples of revolution we've seen in the recent times, which actually do address the climate catastrophe, have been in Sudan, in Egypt, in various parts of the Middle East, but also other parts of the country. We've seen, sort of democratic revolutions in Latin America, which isn't exactly what I mean by revolution, but it's still made quite a lot of push towards a better world. And also, I want to tie that into something that Carl is saying in the chat, talking about how will you get a revolution without killing more people than you're trying to save? Well, the first thing I say to that is, you can take probably the greatest example of a revolution, the Russian Revolution of 1917. More people were killed during the making of a film about the revolution than were actually killed during the revolution. Revolutions are not violent bloodletting event. That is not what they are at all. They are mass uprisings from below in which the workers supplant the ruling class and position themselves as that ruling class so they can run society truly democratically from the workplaces and organize for need instead of profit. That's what socialism is, and that's why revolution, I believe, is important. Is that it's not just about incremental changes or trying to do it over a certain amount of time. I believe ultimately, as long as you try and do it over time, capitalism will attack those reforms and try and roll them back. But at the same time, as revolutionaries, we are the greatest reformists, I believe, because as revolutionaries, we are constantly fighting for a change to the system, but that causes reforms to be pushed through. And we are actually the strongest people who are pushing for those reforms because of our revolutionary attitude to fighting capitalism.
I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say earlier on, Aoife, when you said about like when I've talked about what could we do, it's really interesting that you went straight to people, giving people power over their own communities, telling people because I think what a lot of people don't really think of is the fact that a lot of the things that we get when the capitalists are making money, they're making it not in their own backyard, and they're not destroying their own back gardens and what have you, or their own forests or something. They're going to a different country, they're going somewhere else and destroying their population's resources and taking more out of a place in a way that maybe if people were in control of their own areas and it was groups of people locally, perhaps they wouldn't be doing those things to their own homes. And I found that really quite inspirational that we'd go back there. The question was it's interesting. The question was, what do we need to do? And we've definitely gone down the how do we need to do it, haven't we? We've gone down the how do we need to do it, which is what I was going to end on. But if there was one single action that we could do now, if there's anything at all, what would it be? I guess the revolution is going to be your answer there, Liam. But I'm gonna come to Carlos now.
Yeah, no, I think this debate is very exciting. It's very good to have it because I think it's this discussion that the proletariat is not necessarily the same as what's happening in Mexico, in Latin America. So these experiences are different, but that nonetheless, the key point I said, you both mentioned it, is solidarity. How do we put these struggles in dialogue with each other to learn from each other and to then produce something different? And of course, that difference is what's valuable here. There is no universal solution. For example, Wendell Berry used to say that what's best for the global society is what's best locally. So what we do locally, as Paul just said, is necessarily will be good globally. The thing is that to maintain these processes of capitalist extraction at the rate that they are happening, just-in-time capitalism, we've seen this with supply chain crisis at the moment. With the COVID pandemic, we also saw it, how globally interconnected the economy is and how wasteful and problematic it is to sustain it. And it depends on fossil fuels, and depends on fossil capital, it depends on plunder and extraction from the South. So again, we need to question that. And if we just relocalize our societies, our communities, then I think that gives us a key moment there. And this also points, I think, to what Paul was saying, key point. What do we do? What we do now is we need to collectivize. We need to do this locally. We cannot do this individually. We know that that's a strategy of neoliberal capitalism to say that you can do this on your own. You pull yourself by your own bootstraps. That idea of merit, we have to demolish it. That's problematic. It pits us against each other, as Liam said as well. What we need to do is solidarize, collectivize, organize, all this stuff that how do we resist sabotage, disrupt supply chains, and how do we make them our own? How can we stop depending on the intermediaries? How do we move away from buying from the supermarkets? Let's produce our own food locally. This can be done in cities. It's not a matter of going to the field and working. No, we can do this locally. Look at the examples in the north, in the south, in El Alto, in Bolivia, in the pandemic. People organized communal kitchens, solidarity. People came together at their own aid without the government telling them how to organize. There was no market. It was pure use value, if you want to look at it in Marxist terms, not exchange value, right? So again, how do we design societies in that way? And I think we have the capacities to do that. You know, it's not this myth that we compete with each other all the time and we want to destroy, you know, get the best from the other. This Hobbesian world, it's a lie. You know, we need to rethink that and think like, no, we are, you know, altruistic people by nature. We support each other and we care about each other, and care should be at the center of these new societies. I'm sorry if I'm just roping around, but I think if we collectivize, there is answer in collectivity because we are creative. We can come up with stuff. We don't need, you know, these global chains to sustain us or tell us what to do. Yeah.
I really want to pick out something that you said there, which was care, right? And I think sometimes a lot of the time we find ourselves in spaces where there's a huge like burnout culture. And I think at times it can feel quite inevitable because of the kind of work that we do, but at the same time that care is integral, right? Because I think what I've noticed is that initially, I think when I started, and when you start with certain organizations, we often kind of, because we don't actually have methods of organizing that that are relative to what we do, we kind of like end up reflecting what capitalism does a lot of the time, right? And it's not until you're in that space when you realize that you're doing that, you're like, oh, now we have to like develop this culture of care. And I think it's really interesting. And I think it's about developing the ways we organize within our communities. And I definitely echo everything Carlos said, because I think what I would say is the solution is a call to action, right? It's a call to finding your communities, right? I always say that like find your people. Like that's what I've been doing, right? It's about where can we start these discussions? I feel like a really important part of the solution is holding space, right? When we think about the dynamics between like the most privileged and the least, the global north, the global south, right? I think a really key integral part that we can do is hold space, right? So the people that have the most to say because they have lived experience of not just the system, but of their lives and how the system has affected these lives, right? We can actually put these people at the forefront. We can listen to them and equally learn from them and learn from each other, right? And we see this all the time, like using this as an example, right? Like a really interesting, well, for example, trains, right? They were those people managing the trains were on strike. Like that was, at times it was a bit worrying because obviously people had to go in and out of the club, but people from civil society, you know, there are a few difficulties around that, but of course we were standing in solidarity. We're always going to be standing in solidarity with people who are rightfully demanding more. But I think what would be really interesting if say with sufficient organizing, right, do it for free, as it were, right? Like keep working, right? But do it for free, because then you're actually affecting the company, right? They're not getting the money. People are walking in and out using the transportation as they should, right? Like that would be a really interesting thing. And these are quite tangible things we can do, little things that we can do to challenge that system. I think these are the solutions, challenging that system and finding new methods, right? And finding the methods that work for our communities, because it's not a universal thing, right? I think if anything, right, if we're going to try and challenge capitalism, it's about breaking it down, right? Because capitalism is this one huge like ideology that works however it can and will work however it can so long as it exists. Like let's actually break things down, make things work for our communities, right? Challenge that and find ways of learning from one another, right? We can learn from different communities and we don't necessarily have to parallel what we do, but we can take what's necessary, we can take what works for us and put that into our into what we do, into our actions. And I think that's what I mean when I say incremental, right? These are revolutions, right? Plural, right? And these apply to the multitude of communities that exist and will continue to exist, have existed, and will come to exist.
Yeah, and I think that is a really important point. Is that, look, you know, we don't want to be utopian here. You know, so what socialism is and what it will look like is something that will grow out of the movement itself. It's not something that we can sit and theorize about. The experience of political action and of organizing ourselves collectively is where we will get the ideas of what socialism will look like. I mean, when you see revolutions in places like Sudan or in Egypt or in Russia or throughout history, this is where you get a immense amount of knowledge about what it might look like, what things can go wrong, what things you need to do instead. And actually that is what's important. When we organize collectively, we understand how to organize society in the best way possible, because the most amount of people are organized democratically to discuss what this society will look like, as opposed to a very, very small minority of people who are organized together as a class purely to make more profit for themselves as individuals. The only time they ever organize together as a class is when they can try and crush the workers further and further down so they can go back to trying to monopolize, make more money for themselves. But socialism is fundamentally different to that. It's about everyone being involved.
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, all of it. Right, so we're into the last 10 minutes now, and there's one thing I want to address before we're going to go on. So have a think about what you would like your closing comments to be, by the way. But for 5 minutes, I'd just like to talk about we've had. I often think we've had 40 years of very, very well-funded think tanks in the US, like, say, for example, the Koch brothers. I often reference. They have been talking about how climate change is actually not real, and that kind of tiny bit of climate science is often funded by them and their think tanks, and a lot of what people believe now, a lot of this they call themselves libertarians, but they're not libertarians at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't believe in patents. But they have really changed the public's mind about things, and people have been conditioned to believe certain things, like the only thing that can work is capitalism, and So the question is, how do we engage with those people who've had this like really, really long-term conditioning to change their minds and come with us? Because remember, a lot of workers aren't in the same place as we are with regards to what we know about climate change, what we know about capitalism, what we know about work. They might just be thinking, actually, things could be a lot worse because my boss pays me and therefore I need my boss to be looked after. And they may believe in trickle down and all sorts of things. So what can we do to engage those people in a constructive and non-patronizing way, I guess?
Yeah. It's an important question. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that that's exactly why I talk about deep-rooted organizing, because it's deep-rooted. When we say that, what we mean is that it's with care and it's done in a way that, like you said, isn't patronizing. It's about just sitting down and talking with a person, right? When I say community, I actually mean community. I mean people that you know, people that you want to know. And sure, you might start off in a place where ideologically you're different, where politically it might be quite different, where you're not necessarily on the same page, but that's okay. I think I don't think it's someone who's that's an interesting thing about a debate. When we have a debate, right, the right doesn't have to win that debate, it simply has to have that debate, because it implies that apparently these two arguments are equal, which they're not. And that's the thing. When we talk to people who are arguably on that side, right, we're not having a debate. That's the whole point. We're not having a debate. We're talking as people, right, and we're relating it to our lives, right. I think that's the key thing, right. Unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of people who actually don't care about state murder, about state persecution. There are going to be a lot of people who don't care about ecocide. There are going to be a lot of people who simply just don't care about the South. And that's a really unfortunate thing. And I hope that we can move and grow and develop in a way that we actually grow that culture of care to extend globally, to extend that solidarity, right? But when you're in this like one-to-one situation, right, ultimately you have to relate it to that person as well. And I think that's when you have to get quite personal and be like, hey, actually, everything you're frustrated about, everything you're angry about, right? Like, it's not about using like complex, as it were, terminology. It's just about making it, understandable, and also just having a conversation, right? Keeping it balanced. Like, I think we can avoid aggression. Like, I don't think that's necessary. I think we can just talk as people, and there will ultimately be people who are never going to agree with you, but that's okay, because they're not the people that are making up your community. We have hundreds, thousands, right, millions of people who are making up our communities, right? And we simply just have to find those people. And it's not a matter of convincing, it's just a matter of finding humanity, I think, within someone else.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about experience in the struggle, because it's a slightly different issue, but something like gay rights, for example, I'm sure people have probably seen the film Pride. It's about LGSM, lesbians and gays support the miners, who organized to support striking miners during the miners' strike in the 80s. Now, at the start, the miners were kind of a bit homophobic, weren't quite sure, but at the end they were all for it. They were totally in support and offered their full solidarity. And actually what that led to was a motion being passed at the Labour conference, so for the Labour Party to support equalising the age of consent, and eventually it was equalised. So that is one example of how struggle and solidarity can really bring people on leaps and bounds in terms of their ideas. Now, in the Northeast, there's going to be some stagecoach strikes coming up, starting on Monday. Actually, workers going out on strike, and this in and of itself is going to be a big opportunity for a big opportunity for experience for these workers to learn about what you can get from struggle, from acting against capitalism, from acting against the bosses. And actually, what we like to do is we like to go down to the picket lines and show solidarity. I mean, I'm just going to show you this. This is the front copy of our paper, Socialist Worker. It's got some stuff about climate change on. So we're going to be going down, talking to them, interacting with them as the SWP, and sort of getting these debates going, talking to them about why we say it's CON26, not COP26, why we say all the world leaders are the problem. These are the kind of debates you can have when you intervene in strikes, in workplace action. And that's at the heart of socialism too. So I think that's a very important aspect of how we actually convince people.
I think those are great answers. I think, my main point would be we need to make climate change material interest of the working class if we want to make it, actually convince people that are working and changing that this is happening. If you look at the United States, the majority of the working class is either black or woman. So again, it's not necessarily the whites that are taking control there. So if we just present this as a problem that puts them if you look at the intersectionality of climate change, because they're women, because they're black, because they're Latino, because they're etc., they are more affected by these consequences. They're exploited by the system, and then we can then produce something that appeals to their interests in their everyday lives. Because this is the demagogy that Donald Trump or whoever comes into power uses to them. I will give you back your jobs, and then we put jobs against the environment, and this is the same narrative that gets reproduced all the time. So basically, if we made climate change a matter of a material character of the working class, then it would have an appeal to them better. Not of these technocratic ways of framing it and presenting it in conferences, etc. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to the science. Of course we should, but we should present this as another way of framing it, not as a matter out there, not more like in our everyday lives. And I guess that's the point of how organizing, how presenting it in a different ways matters, because it's not a thing about saying like, oh, it's there's no alternative to capitalism. We know there are thousands of alternatives to ways of living and organizing, and then the question is like how we produce them. I think by leading by example there is fundamental. If we produce the utopia, if we reach that utopia, then of course everybody else will say like, hey, well, I want that too. I don't want to be exploited. I don't want to be sacrificed. I don't want to have these problems as well. So I think imagining and doing that utopia is fundamental to reach that goal.
Thank you so much. Right, we're going to go on to the final closing comments now from each of you. Let's do it. Let's keep it under a minute. So some brief final comments, and also just what we'll do is I'll do some comments afterwards, and then we'll have a little brief chat afterwards. So don't go straight away when I say bye. But so if we can do that, and then I'll take us to the end. But I do want to thank you all on behalf of Socialist Think Tank. You've been absolutely brilliant, and thanks as well to all those people who are commenting. Those comments that I haven't been able to read out, there've been so many good ones, but they have appeared on the screen as they come on. So thank you very much for that. I am going to go to Liam first, and then Carlos, and then I'll go to Aoife.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I mean, I think as we've discussed throughout the meeting, capitalism is a system of chaos. It's a system which creates climate change, racism, colonialism, many more things. And as socialists, we have a lot to say about this. And actually, when we organize democratically, that is where our power truly lies. I think as long as we can unite on the basis of fighting capitalism, we'll be okay. There's always going to be disagreements within the movement, different opinions about how we actually change the movement. But actually, when we have connected working class organization, that will sort itself out. We can have those debates without the capitalists trying to crush us down. So that's what I'd say to finish. And thank you for inviting me along tonight.
You're very welcome. Carlos.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you also to all of you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I would just add that we need to understand that climate change is not like unwanted externality of capitalism. Climate change is the direct result of capitalism. So we cannot solve it through capitalism. No, that's why we need to pay a lot of attention into these false solutions, into how corporations, governments, NGOs reproduce the same language, put it into their advantage, and then sabotage it from within and occupy it. So that's, I think, what some of the things we need to stay clear, that we need to different ways of thinking, but we also need different ways of acting. So it's not only a matter of praxis, but it's also a matter of theory. We have to put those things together, think differently, act differently. And I would just end that one of the key things that I think are missing is to reclaim our right or our sense of imagination. If we don't imagine something different, with the tool set that has been given to us by capitalism, neoliberalism is basically something that fits well into their mode of the world. We have to shake that out. We have to think differently, act differently. And there's this saying by Audre Lorde, this poet, Caribbean poet. She said, "The master tools will never dismantle the master house." So we have to build our own set of tools to dismantle this structure of capitalism.
Yeah, I love Audre Lorde. Absolute icon. Love her so much. And yeah, just to finish up there, like capitalism is colonialism, right? It's that continuation of exploitation, of violence, foremost violence. We've got to understand that this is a violent system, right? It's killing our families, killing our comrades. And I think definitely, as I was saying before, like I want to give a call to action, because we can start that, right? We can find our communities, right? I found a lot of communities. I think that's a really important thing, is that not just one community that we're part of, it's multiple communities. So right, let's hold space, let's find moments to have these conversations with one another, where we can see just even like changes within our own communities, and also find that solidarity internationally. I think is really, really important, right? Let's learn from one another. Let's move towards this change, right? Let's be the solution, because we are the solution. Right, the people are the solution. Let's find solidarity across all these intersections of oppressions, of identities. Right, let's progress. Right, let's move to a world where we can actually exist as individuals and actually look into ourselves. I think a really key part is actually having that revolution of the mind. Right, realize your place within society. Realize how you also inevitably, in one way or another, perpetuate the system that you're fighting against. Right, relearn that. It's also unlearning and relearning. I think is a really good thing. Unlearn, relearn, hold space, and just be there in solidarity. And yeah, a huge thanks to you, Paul. Huge thanks to tap to this opportunity as well. And it's been wonderful having these conversations.
It's been an absolutely pleasure having the three of you on. I couldn't have asked for three better guests. I've learned absolutely loads from this, and I hope people have at home as well. Thank you to the audience at home. One of those communities that you could join is Socialist Think Tank. You can become a member of Socialist Think Tank. It is free because we are socialists, but you can make a donation as well. And what that will give you is just access to giving us ideas for shows. Join our community, join our Discord community, and keeping up to date with all of the things that we do. We are always after the opportunity to try to promote other people within our movement, promote those ideas that we have. So please do, if you are interested, join Socialist Think Tank. Do us a favour and do all the things that that capitalists love to do, such as subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitch and Twitter, and on Instagram, and because we've kind of got to play the game whilst the game is as it is. But please do those things for us. It would be it's massively appreciated. It does help us. It helps us get the message out there. And who wouldn't want to hear this discussion put out to a wider audience by people? Also, you can subscribe to us on podcasts and listen to us. All of our shows are on there in every single format, so video and audio podcasts. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much to the viewers and listeners. and we will see you all again soon. And many thanks especially to the three of you, and we will see you next time.
Keep the red flag flying here.